How many decisions do you think you make in a day? You make 35,000 decisions. That's a lot of decisions. What we're going to talk about today is how can we make better decisions based upon how our brain works. Hi, my name is Dr. Marc Milstein, and welcome to Best of Your Brain podcast. Today, we're going to be talking all about how we can make better decisions, and we're going to talk about how our brain works. So let's do a quick brain warm-up. Think about this question. Mary's mother has 4 daughters. One daughter's name is April, the second daughter's name is May, and the third daughter's name is June. What's the name of the 4th daughter? Did you say July? If you said July, don't feel bad, it's not the right answer. But most people say July. The real answer is, or the correct answer is Mary. And so what is happening there? Why do we often want to say July? Well, that's more than just a brain warm-up. It's actually an insight into how our brain makes decisions. We'll get there in a moment. But if we think about it, decisions are really fascinating. There's big decisions and there's small decisions. And those 35,000 decisions that you make in a day, well, some of them are just where you're going to move your eyes. And it sounds like so simple, but where you move your eyes can play a key role in survival. Are we going to see something dangerous, or we're going to find our next meal? And we think about how our ancestors had to really make good decisions just to survive. And we now have to make good decisions not only to survive, but think about our finances, our health, just our overall well-being. And it's also interesting to think about how decisions can impact our mental health, our brain health. Most issues with mental health or brain health actually disrupt decision-making. And our ability to take care of our brain preserves our ability to make good decisions. Also interesting to think about how sometimes even the smallest decisions, you hear people tell stories that, one day I turned left down the street versus right, and I met this person that changed my life, or I went to the 3rd floor instead of the 2nd floor. So even small decisions can have a really big impact. Now let's go a little bit deeper into this, and let's talk about the work of Daniel Kahneman. And he actually won the Nobel Prize for understanding and doing research into how our brain makes decisions. And what he talks about is 2 systems that the brain has to make decisions, System 1 and System 2. Now, when we use System 1 to make a decision, it's really fast. It's intuitive. It's like if I were to show you a picture of someone's face and you said, oh, this person looks happy, sad, angry, that's System 1. You're using a very fast decision-making process. Now, if you answered the question, July, you very likely were using System 1. Now, System 2 is more analytical, logical. It's slower. It also takes a lot more energy. And our brain, as amazing as it is, doesn't really want to use a lot of energy. So we tend to default to System 1, the faster way of making a decision. Now, if you have to solve a math problem or think about something more analytical, you use System 2. If we take this a step further, and we look into where are these systems in the brain? Well, we can think of our brain in some ways almost like an onion, and you can peel the layers. Now, System 2 is the outer part of our brain. That's the more analytical, that's the neocortex, that's the part of our brain involved in making very complex decisions. So if we think about these different layers to the brain, we start to think about why do we sometimes make bad decisions? Well, part of it is that we have to make 35,000 decisions in a day. And so we often revert to System 1 because there's just so many decisions to be made. Now, there's also this insight into something called cognitive illusions. The human brain is amazing, but it's still evolving. And there are these, what we call almost like cognitive flaws, these little issues with our brain that can make it difficult to make a good decision. And let's talk about them so we can really optimize our decision-making process. So one of them is really highlighted in this very famous experiment. They took a group of people, they divided them into 2 groups, and they showed them, both groups, they showed them the same photo of a hotel room. Same picture, but one group, they said, do you think that this hotel room costs more than $5,000 a night? The other group, they asked, do you think this hotel room costs more than $50 a night? And then they asked, based upon this hotel room, how much do you think, write down on a piece of paper, how much you think this hotel room costs per night? Now, the people that they asked, do you think it costs more than $5,000 a night? They wrote down about $800 to $900 a night. The people that they said, do you think it costs more than $50 a night? those people wrote down about $200 a night. Now, this is something in our brain called anchoring, where by just presenting information in a certain way, it can change our ability to make a decision. What we understand is that sometimes the way information is presented to us can influence our decision-making process. Now we can take it a step further. And there was this other experiment, it was really interesting, and it looks at unconscious cues. And they did this experiment in an office. And if you've worked in an office, you know they have the room with a kitchen, it's like a pantry, and they have a box there. It's often called the honesty box. And if somebody in the office needs to buy coffee or coffee cups or snacks, this box is placed there and it's kind of on your honor to put some money in the box, and maybe they ask for like 50 cents or $1. And it's really like on your honor to put it there. So they did this experiment. People didn't know they were part of this experiment. And the box either had flowers on it or human eyes. And what they found was that when there was flowers on the box, most people didn't put any money into the honesty box. They're just like, I'm not going to do that. But if the box had eyes on it, people put money in. And then they asked people at the end of the experiment, did you notice that there was anything on the box, like flowers or eyes? And almost nobody noticed. But unconsciously, the presence of eyes or this unconscious impact of feeling like you're being watched drove people to make the decision to put money in the box. And we realize is that sometimes there's unconscious things that are taking place that drive our decision making as well. And there was a study done with waiters and waitresses, and they found that if they just put their hand on people's shoulders, like right before they're about to get a tip, people tipped about 30% more. We talked in the persuasion episode about Costco and how they give the samples, and that can push us to make a decision to buy. Also, how you phrase things. If you ask somebody, how happy are you? And then ask them, how many dates have you been on? They will often report a different level of happiness if you just switch the questions. And first you ask, how many dates have you been on? And how happy are you? Death tax versus estate tax. It's the same thing, but how it's phrased can impact people's ability to make a decision. Now, one of my favorite aspects of this is a cognitive illusion or flaw called asymmetric dominance. And we see this all the time. And you often will see it at the movie theater. If you go to the movie theater and you see the popcorn, and the popcorn it's for sale with different sizes, and you might notice that the small popcorn is probably around $4 and the large popcorn is $9. And oftentimes people will look at this and they'll say like, $9 for popcorn, that seems outrageous. That's very expensive. It seems really high. But then they add a third price, and it's the medium. They will price the medium at $8.50. So it's only 50 cents less than the large. The brain will look at that and say, wait, only 50 cents more for the large? That's a really good deal. I should get the large. I'm not going to get the medium. That's not a good decision. But that medium was placed there as a decoy. They don't want you to buy the medium. They want to drive you to make the decision that you need to spend for the large. We see this in subscription models. It's in cell phone plans. Often just so many choices that we're given, there's one bad choice in there, so it drives us to make the more expensive choice. Another key aspect of decision making, and this is part of what Daniel Kahneman won his Nobel Prize for, is this idea of loss aversion. And is there something in your closet, like a shirt or a sweater, that you will very likely never wear again? But if you try to get rid of it, you go to your closet, you try to give it away, you just can't do it. That at its essence is loss aversion. And really what's happening there is that the brain hates pain. The brain will do anything it can to avoid you feeling the feeling of pain. And believe it or not, the feeling of giving away a shirt or a sweater can cause pain in the brain. And your brain is trying to protect you from that, so it doesn't want you to go through that experience. Now, it sounds so silly, but this can play a key role in decision-making in relationships. Sometimes people will stay in bad relationships because they're afraid of the pain of breaking up. People will stay in bad investments because they're afraid of letting go and feeling that initial pain, even though in the long run it's better to maybe sell the stock or the bond or the mutual fund. We also see this in politics and policy. And it's interesting to actually go deeper into this. And what we realize is that basically Las Vegas exists in part because of loss aversion. There's these billion-dollar casinos in the middle of nowhere. What Kahneman found was that if you lose $10, that feeling of pain, that level of pain that you feel, in order to kind of get rid of it, you actually have to win $20. So you have to double the amount of winning to have the same feeling that basically overshadows the loss or gets rid of it. And if you think about it, what that means is that sometimes we can be chasing the feeling of winning to get rid of the feeling or the pain of losing. And if you think about Las Vegas or gambling, if we're playing a game that in the end, if we play long enough, we're not going to win, well, that's how those casinos are built. They really are tapping into this loss aversion. We are programmed in our brain to not want to have that feeling of pain. We also realize that if you have something, once it's in your hands, you really don't want to get rid of it. This is Amazon's free return policy. They know that once it's delivered to you, it's really hard to send it back, even if you don't want it or it's not the right size or it's not the right thing. Garage sales, they've done these studies where they find that they'll ask people this thing that you have in your garage sale, how much is it worth? And people will value their stuff much higher than the same or very similar stuff if it's not yours. You see, getting rid of something that's yours causes pain, and we value that item more. Now, there's this really, I find it kind of fascinating study. And they did this with magicians. And they took people and they went up to them on the street. The people didn't know that there was a magician in the study, but they would just go up to people and they would say, look at these two pictures. And which person do you think is more attractive? And the person that was being asked, they would point to the one they thought was more attractive. And then the magician, unbeknownst to the person in the study, would actually use sleight of hand and switch the pictures and show them the other picture, the one that they didn't pick. And they would say, well, tell me more about why you think this person is so attractive. And the majority of people would actually answer the question back and say, well, I like the person's eyes, or I like their hair, or I like their bone structure. And they didn't even notice, or consciously they were not aware that they weren't even talking about the picture that they said was more attractive. They were talking about the one they thought was less attractive, but they were justifying what they were saying. And this is also in part this bias that the brain has, that sometimes when we start talking about something, we don't want to have the pain or feel the pain that we're wrong or that we're saying the wrong thing. And we'll actually cover up in our brain and start making decisions, not even based upon what our initial thoughts are or what the right answer might be. Interesting to think about this in terms of politics and just decisions that can be made in day-to-day life. So if we take all of this information and this research and we say, okay, how can we use this? What does it mean? How can we make better decisions? Part of this is understanding that the human brain, as amazing as it is not purely rational. It can be influenced, it can be nudged, it can be manipulated, and oftentimes without us even realizing it. And oftentimes now we're hearing about people turning to AI, artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, to ask for advice or help with decision making. Is that a good idea? Well, we really shouldn't be fully trusting AI when it comes to decision making. Because although AI is amazing, it can be really helpful in gathering information and summarizing information and even brainstorming sometimes, we're concerned about how AI makes decisions. AI can have bias. It can actually fall into the same flaws that the human brain can fall into. We also don't completely understand how AI is making certain decisions. There's this we call kind of a black box there. We also realize that AI isn't very good at reasoning, doesn't really have common sense. Although we can turn to AI to get some ideas for decision making, we want to be very careful that we keep that something that our own brain is doing. We realize that part of all of this is just awareness. Awareness is like a superpower when it comes to decision making. The next time you have to make a decision, just stop for a moment and ask yourself, is this like the anchoring trick that we talked about in the hotel room study? Is it an unconscious cue? Is it asymmetric dominance? Is it something where I'm given a third option that really isn't a good option to push me to make another decision? Is it loss aversion? Do I not want to give something up that in the long run is better for me? Am I using system one when I really should be using system two? And there's a couple tricks and techniques that can be utilized. If you've ever heard that saying that it's hard to walk and chew bubble gum at the same time, well, there's some brain science there. If you're talking with somebody and you're walking with them and you can answer the questions and make decisions while you're walking, you're very likely using system one, and that can be okay. It's okay to use system one because we have 35,000 decisions to make. But for the important, critical decisions, what we realize is that that can be a moment to just stop. If you ever had that moment where you're talking to somebody and they ask you something, or you have to make a decision, you actually have to stop walking. You're very likely using system two. You're tapping into a much more energy necessary system in your brain, And it's very hard to do two things at the same time. So eliminating multitasking or just saying, I'm just going to focus on this for a few more moments. I'm going to just think about how do I engage system two so I can really try to make my best decision. There's another trick, and it relates to this idea. Let's say that you have an issue with a health concern, and you go to the doctor and you realize that you need to get a second opinion. And the second opinion is it's expensive. And if you ask people, do you think you should get that second opinion? Oftentimes people say, no, I don't need it. I'm fine with the first opinion. I'm just going to go through and move forward. But if you ask people and you rephrase it and you say, let's take a different perspective. What if it's not you in this situation, but it's your friend, someone you care about, a family member? Then would you tell them that they should get that second opinion? And the vast majority of people will now change their answer. They will say, yeah, it's very important. They should go get that second opinion. And what we realize is that sometimes when we're thinking about things or decisions for ourselves, we can be emotional. We don't really see the full perspective. We can fall into a system one way of thinking. But if we just change our perspective and think about it as another person, somebody we care about, that taps into a much more analytical part of our brain, more logical. That uses system two. So that little trick of asking yourself, what advice would I give someone else in this exact same situation can be really helpful and very simple and effective when it comes to decision making. Now, I hope you leave here today with some good tips to make better decisions. And whether or not you're going to use system one or system two, I hope you subscribe to this podcast. Thank you for watching. See you next time.